Imagine approximately 2,000 years ago, Cleopatra had children with both Greece and Rome, Alexander and Caesar. Then, approximately 300 years after that, Ethiopian wrote a book called the Book of Testament, which prophesies against certain places. Then, around the 7th century, those certain places decided to make up their own religions. For example, in the 7th century, Europeans converted to Judaism. 7th century is when Muslims started, and 7th century was also when the first pope started. Even though they want to say Peter, but we know that Rome was not a Christian state in the 1st century. So the first pope was called Pope Paul in the 7th century. Then in the 15th century, they realized that, people still realize that the prophecy is against them. Therefore, they need writings. They need to place certain Jewish historians in the 1st century to confirm certain narratives that they want to promote. For example, they want the crucifixion of Jesus to be established, when in fact, Jesus was never here in the 1st century to be crucified. So let's watch. After Alexander of Macedonia was the first leader of Rome, he created many wars. Then he fell sick and died, and he called his servants and parted his kingdom among them. His servants ruled every one of his place. They all put crowns upon themselves, so did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus. So he was hostage of Rome, of the kingdom of the Greeks. So Rome is part of Greece. Greece is part of Rome. In those days went out of Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, saying, Let us go and make a covenant with the heathen. Whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen. They forsook the holy covenant and joined themselves to the heathen. When the kingdom was established, he thought to reign over Egypt. So he entered into Egypt. Thus he got the strong cities of the land of Egypt. After that, Antiochus had smitten Egypt. Therefore, Egypt is part of Greece, just like Rome. So then they entered the city of David. Because remember, the entire region from Egypt to Ethiopia, to India used to be called Ethiopia. So they built walls and towers within the city of David, and they put a stronghold for them, and they put therein a sinful nation. So today there's a sinful nation there. So they stored the spoils of Jerusalem, and now they became an evil adversary to Israel. And we all know that the Ethiopians are the children of Israel. So Jerusalem fell, whereupon the city was made an habitation of strangers, and became strange to those that were born in her. And her own children left her. Remember, that entire place used to be called Ethiopia in reference to dark-skinned people. So Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that everyone should leave his law. So all the heathen agreed. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion and sacrificed unto his idols. Jerusalem, Judah, followed the strange laws of the land, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. So he wrote to his whole kingdom, which included Judah. So they committed evils in the land. And wheresoever was found with any of the book of the testament, the king command was to put him to death. But someone spoke up and said, though the nations are under the king's dominion, obey him, and fall away every one from the religion of their fathers, and gave consent to his commandments. In other words, he was warning them that you guys are doing the wrong thing. So he said, we will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion, either on the right hand or to the left. But today there are people going out their way to change the ordinances that was already set by Ethiopians. So let's watch before he says a word. It seems that classical historians and geographers, so not Jewish historians, classical historians and geographers call the whole region from India to Egypt, both countries inclusive, by the name of Ethiopia. India itself used to be called Eastern Ethiopia. So where's Mount Horeb? So this is one of the things that they changed. Mount Horeb is the mountain at which the 10 Commandments were given to Moses by God. Don't forget that part. So they basically changed Mount Horeb into a mount of sin. So they made sure they put the sin in front of it. So that's what they do. They change up something that was already written by Ethiopians, and make up their own translations. So let's watch.
And part of
Ethiopian Bible.
Yeah, so the Ethiopia church has is like is a wing of
a wing. In other words, he's trying to say is it comes from other people. They learn from other people. So let's watch his lives.
You know, you have these different sort of overarching denominations of Christendom. You have today Protestants, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Roman Catholic, and then the Ethiopian church. And the Ethiopian church,
in other words, you want to make it seem like Ethiopia came last, when in fact Ethiopia was first. We just said the whole region, including Jerusalem, back in the day used to be called Ethiopia. But he wants to place Ethiopia behind everyone else, all these pagan places.
We know that around the 4th century, missionaries from Syria went down to what then was referred to as the Kingdom of Aksum, which is in modern-day Ethiopia, and they brought with them a whole host of literature. And part of this literature was New Testament books in Greek and the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Which is that.
So they came with Greek translations. You heard what he just said? We just said that Greeks are the heathens. So you're basically saying that heathens brought heathens' works to Ethiopia and teach them what? The wrong?
Point was finalized. And the Ethiopian church took all of this literature, which included literature that nobody considered scripture at the time, and they appear to have just been non-discretionary and included everything. So all of the debates that were happening in the Latin West and the Greek East about what was and wasn't scripture, they looked at that and they said, we're not really interested.
Don't forget, the Council of Nicaea happened after the Ethiopians wrote the book. So after the Ethiopians wrote the book, Rome decided which part of the book that they wanted in their version. So either way, Ethiopia comes first. But this guy is like, I don't know what special class he went to, but
interested in that, we'll just take everything. So in being non-discretionary, they end up just canonizing everything, which leaves them with a canon of scripture that is completely unique and includes books like Enoch, which the ancient Jews and every ancient Christian didn't. Well, actually, I should preface that. There were a couple of early Christians who said, we think this could be scripture, but then they accept when, all the debates happen that, okay, those are pretty good reasons we're not going to accept it in the end. And so I don't know where the idea came from, but there is definitely a prevailing.
Remember, in the 15th century, they realized that people are realizing that the prophecy is against them. So they needed someone to change the narrative. So listen exactly what he's about to say.
Myth on the internet that the Ethiopian Bible is the oldest Bible.
So currently, people are realizing that Ethiopia has the oldest, most complete Bible on earth. Therefore, they are the ones who originated Christianity. They have the oldest churches in the world. They have the oldest kingdom in the world. Yet still, he's still going out his way to do what they did in the 15th century, and that is change the story.
And that's not true. In fact, the oldest copy of the Ethiopian Bible, which is full in terms of a Genesis to Revelation copy, is 14th century. So it's a long, long time after. Book of Enoch.
We already know it was written in the 3rd century before the Council of Nicaea. And what did it say? It literally said this: Jesus, the grandchild to Jesus, lived in the latter times after the people had been led away captive. In other words, Exodus is supposed to happen in the latter times and call home again. And almost after all the prophets. So now his grandfather Jesus, as he himself witnesseth, was a man of great diligence and wisdom. In other words, there's going to be 2 Jesus alive in the latter times. And that's when the first Jesus died, leaving his book almost perfected to Sirach, his son. And then Sirach, his son, gave it to his own son Jesus. So there's 2 Jesus alive in the latter times. In other words, Jesus was not here 2,000 years ago. He's only supposed to be here now. And who also supposed to be here now? Solomon. So that's how Jesus did imitate Solomon and was no less famous for wisdom and learning, both being indeed a man of great learning and so reputed also. My grandfather Jesus, when he had much given himself to the reading of the law and the prophets and the other book of our fathers. In other words, Jesus is supposed to be here in these times. And it's going to appear that he died. But in reality, and they're going from us to be utter destruction, but they are in peace. So let's read it. But the souls of the righteous are in the hand of God. In the sight of the unwise, they seem to die, but they are in peace. For though they be punished in the sight of men, yet is their hope full of immortality. And that's what's going to happen to Jesus. So why would the Syrians go to Ethiopia to give them a book that is literally saying, woe be unto thee, Babylon and Asia, woe be unto thee, Egypt and Syria. But this clown is telling you that a Syrian went to Ethiopia to tell them that. Watch his more lies.
That things were spread around, but the Gospels are written in the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. And they're written in this period of time where you have groups of individuals who could have fact-checked those things. So,
how do you fact-check someone coming back from the dead?
Well,
how many people saw his body, right?
Well, Paul says that 400 people saw him all at once.
Paul said it, some made-up Jewish historian that they placed in the first century, that he's repeating as if it's factual. So let's watch what the Most High has to say, instead of listening to that clown.
Revolves around his personal rule. You are descended, Your Imperial Majesty, from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba.
Literally, the Canadian reporter is not asking him, but telling him that he's a descendant of Solomon and Sheba. And how could he be, when in fact he's the one who wrote this? He wrote the list of kings, letting you know that the Ethiopian kingdom goes back over 6,400 years. So it didn't start with Menelik, the son of Solomon and Sheba. It started over 6,400 years ago. So that's why in plain English, instead of saying, yes, I am a descendant of Solomon and Sheba, he said this.
This is just our story, ancient story. The Queen of Sheba, she goes to visit Solomon, King Solomon. She met one friend. She returned back to her country. Our story says since that time.
Our story, which is a myth, is fictional. So let's watch who God is. You are standing in the house of Jehovah in the courtyards of our God. Praise Jah, for Jehovah is good. And we know that the house of Jehovah is the house of David. For Jah has chosen even Jacob for himself, Israel for his special property. So his foundation is in the holy mountains. The Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. With Ethiopia and of Zion it will be said, this and that man was born in her, and the highest himself shall establish her. So one of those men is God himself. So it's literally Father and Son, God and Christ. So God says that him and Christ will be born in Ethiopia, the king of Zion, during the latter times. So who is the king of Zion in the latter times? Let's watch.
Province. In 1928, he led the troops that killed Empress Zoditu's husband, who was not of royal blood, and became regent. He became emperor on November 2nd, 1930, and was crowned Haile Selassie I, King of Kings, King of Zion, conquering lion of the seed of Judah, power of the Trinity.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all God names. So who did he choose? He said, I was sworn unto David my servant, thy seed will I establish forever and build up the throne for generations. In other words, to the end of time when you get to live forever. So I have found David my soul, my servant, with my holy oil I have anointed him. I will set his hand also in the sea, and his right hand in the rivers. He shall cry unto thee, thou art my father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. And I will make him my firstborn, higher than the kings of the earth. In other words, God himself. And his man is Moses himself. So Moses, by definition, means son, son of. So God himself created David. And Moses also goes by the name of David, Jagai.